for most teams, this time of the season is a challenge. But this new playoff format, and, I was thinking about GM meetings, and we were discussing with Bourne yesterday about, what's the topic that you'd want to bring up if you're down there? It's just this playoff format has got to go. This cannot continue where you're compounding the dog days of a tough regular season slog of an 82-game season, and now you're adding to that even more devalued regular season games because so many teams are basically set. And the only races that we're watching is the Eastern Conference playoff race. Like, enjoy watching. You just saw Philly. They're trash. They're no good. That's not a good hockey team. They're benching their captain. They're in disarray. They were lucky to win that hockey game. They really were. It was a million posts, and Toronto went to sleep for a couple of moments, and they banged out a couple of goals. You're going to see Washington tonight. I promise you, Washington stinks. Even if they win this game, who cares? They stink. You don't care about that. The Red Wings have gone into a complete tank. They're blaming a patch on their jersey. Things are so bad that they've got the fans in complete disarray. This format just sucks. And one thing I thought was, and not to make excuses for the group, I think there's enough people that do enough of that, but one of the what ifs for me about this team, it hadn't even dawned on me until last night or when I was watching it or this morning when I was thinking about it, is what if this team didn't always have this level of dog days? What if it was, hey, there's competitive games down the stretch that you're playing in year after year after year, rather than constantly being able to go into coast mode, chill mode, non-competitive mode for, 2 months before the playoffs start every single year. And I think that's a real failing of the league. Again, you're professional athletes. That's what the money's for. You're supposed to dig in. You're supposed to do stuff, blah, 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 blah. All I'm saying is it is an interesting thing that happened with this core at this time, just like people can say about the restricted free agency and them changing it and the dynamics of the salary cap and getting hit with the pandemic. We do all these big what ifs, but that one really does never get raised. Anyways, James Mirtle, senior managing editor at The Athletic. He's on the line. He's listening to that little rant. What's up, buddy? How we doing?
I'm good. I totally agree with you. The 1 versus 8, there was always something to play for because it's like, now we're in 6th, now we're in 5th in the East, like keep pushing. And there was something to play for, that you would be fighting for your home ice all the way through. And this has been a problem for the Leafs for a while. Like I remember going to games and being on the road 2018, 2019, and they would have locked away not only being in the playoffs, not only what seed they were in, but who they were playing. And it would be like early March.
Yeah.
And the players are never going to say it, but you can just tell. And I think what you've hit on is 100% true, that in reality, these games don't matter. They don't matter at all. It's like you're back in exhibition season. And, I think you would love your team to be able to play through that and just, and some teams can, and the Leafs have never been a team that could. Some teams can play those meaningless games and just push through and just keep winning. And that's not really been in their DNA. So it's been a problem for them for a long time. And I think that the players have just gotten used to it being this way, that, there's not really a real playoff push.
But this is the part where I go, damn, can you blame them? It'd be one thing, okay, if this was... Part of me wants to be frustrated with the team, and this is actually what sucks as a viewer, is they let in an early goal and you go, damn it, and the first one is a weird one, but the second one you're like, man, come on, wake up. This is the beginnings of periods, just figure this out. This is the same thing with you guys over and over again. And I go, how can I be mad? It's every year of this. This isn't 1 year of it. You want to think, hey, they are trying to materially change their playoffs and so materially change the approach going into it. I just don't know how malaise wouldn't set in when you're looking at it and saying there's no stakes here. Nobody cares what we're doing in these games. Just stay healthy. Don't hurt yourself going into the postseason because, one thing is very clear. You lose any of the 4 guys, you're dead. You lose any of those 4 guys, you got zero chance because they are making up half of your cap sheet, right? So you can't lose any of them. And I'm going, it's hard for me to stay locked in as a viewer. I can't imagine that year over year over year you have this where you've built this up. You've built up this callus. Like, how many years have the Leafs had it during this run, right? Like this iteration of player where they've actually been playing for something meaningful down the stretch. Obviously, the rookie year of everyone where they go and play Washington in the Stanley Cup playoffs, right? Because they were scrapping and clawing. It goes right down to the end. It's Gensel just misses a goal. They beat Pittsburgh. They end up getting in the playoffs. Every single year after that, essentially, has been, you're set. You know what you're doing. Outside of the year that they were robbed of, where they were falling out of the playoffs, which was the pandemic year, it's always set. It's rinse, repeat. It's the same thing over and over again. And I'm curious, as someone who loves to text people around the league and get a feel for things, why there isn't more of just that discussion pushing the change for the playoff format.
It gets talked about a little bit, but they say that they like the division rivalries. They like that it cuts down the travel. You're playing within your division all the way till the third round. But in the Atlantic, I think in some of the other divisions, it's not quite as stale as it is here. You're right. I mean, this is going back to 2018, so it's 6 years, and it's always been. Is it Tampa? Is it Boston? Are you the second seed or the third seed? Do you get home ice or do you not? And for whatever reason, the Leafs are never able to win the division. The only year they win the division is when the Atlantic Division doesn't exist.
Yep.
And it's always either Tampa, Florida, or Boston running away with it. And the Leafs kind of just, oh, well, I guess we're second or third. And, our last 20 games don't matter. And it sucks as a viewer. It does. It sucks as someone in the media trying to you're right. That game last night, it doesn't really matter.
What are you supposed to do? Yeah, what are you supposed to do? Get mad?
It's an exhibition.
Yeah.
It's an exhibition. It's to get ready. An injury thing's a good point. That's the most important thing with these games. I guess the second most important thing with these games is you're integrating some new players and you're trying some different lines and deep pairs and you're hoping that you hit on something. You're hoping you get some momentum. And I'm sure Sheldon Keefe, when it gets down to 6, 7, 8 games left, he's like, okay, now we got to dial in because we got to be ready. And now we got to start playing harder. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. So,
yeah, sure. Fine. But yeah, for the most part, I feel like there's going to be a little juice for Leafs Oilers this weekend because it's Connor McDavid and he always takes this matchup seriously. He's coming to Toronto. There's going to be chance for him likely in the building. It's Zach Hyman's return. These two teams play each other pretty tough. I think that they do have a bit of measuring stick as the Canadian team from the last half decade between each other. So to me, there is something to that. Maybe you get something from the next Sabres game. That's on the 30th because, again, Dahlin and Matthews hate each other, but the last time they played, it was a dog's breakfast, so can't really count on that. And then, you've got a couple Panthers games and a couple Lightning games in April that you could say are measuring stick games, but if you're Toronto, it's a back-to-back to close the year. You think that's going to be the most intense hockey games? You think you're going to extend the Florida and Tampa series? I just, looking at the schedule, I don't see a lot there where you're going to say this is going to be awesome hockey or you're going to learn much from this hockey. And that's frustrating. And I would say this, the counter to it, and even as I'm hearing it to you or from you about the frustration is if I was Keefe or I was the organization looking at the players through a critical lens, I'd be going, well, guys, you didn't have to be in third. You could have had something to fight for had you won more games. You could have had home ice throughout the playoffs. You could have tried to push for a President's Trophy. But again, the regular season has been so devalued for this group and in this league that I kind of find it hard to criticize them for that too. They're also doing it where every single year they've got to turn over the roster. And so the first couple of months of the season are basically exploratory. Last year, they turned over the entire roster at the deadline. It's just, I want to be critical of some things, but I find it to be really, really difficult when you look at the circumstances around them and say, well, yeah, okay, seems a little foolish. Seems like they're not a victim of circumstance, but you know what I'm saying by calling them that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if they change the playoff format, how do you weigh in on adding more teams and having a play-in and stuff like that? Do you think that's a good idea?
I heard Elliot make the most compelling case for it when he was on Chicklets. I would say that in general, I am more of a traditionalist when it comes to this. I just think it's the same thing with March Madness. To me in sports right now, there are two things that just undeniably work. It's the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs and it's March Madness. Mm-hmm. And when they try to tinker with those things, I get really defensive because baseball, I kind of think screwed it up a little bit. Baseball was supposed to be a really cool, you need to be locked into the regular season because they matter so much and the margins for not making it are so fine because if you get in, you can win. And now last year they have a team in the Arizona Diamondbacks that makes it to the World Series, and they were mediocre at best. And I don't like watching that in MLB playoffs, and I don't like the feeling like bad teams make the postseason. The Blue Jays last year were a bad team, and they made the playoffs. Don't really love it. Hockey is perfect, It's just the first round is so intense. You want to watch it. Basketball had to screw around with theirs. The NBA had to screw around because we were getting basically lifeless matchups the entire first round, right? You didn't have to tune in for it whatsoever. So they go, why don't we add a play-in game? We're changing the dynamics of the league when it comes to luxury taxes. There's going to be more parity within the NBA. Let's give this a shot. And I go, yeah, that's fine. NFL is so big; it's a behemoth. There's so much money that you go, yeah. Guess what? They're gonna find ways to monetize more games. I'm sorry, this is the biggest game in town. Hockey, I'm back and forth on it because I like Elliott's argument, but I also just go, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And God, you never put the toothpaste back in the tube with stuff like this, right? Once you go down that path, you can never go back.
Yeah, I think the thing is, for a team like the Leafs, having the play-ins for other teams, because you're finishing ahead of them, it helps you a little bit. Like, at least makes it worth something to finish in the top 6 in your conference, because you don't have to play those extra games, right? And then you could just have like a one game or a best of 3 or something, and then the real first round starts after that. I think that's the way you would have to do it.
I gotta be honest, I think that the most obvious and best playoff format is what the PWHL just did. And they had the guts to do it, and the NHL doesn't seem like they ever would, especially since it's such a boys' club, right? There's so many relationships in hockey that people would never want to step on each other's toes by doing it. But by far, the right thing to do is it's 1 versus 8. But if you're the number 1 team, you get to pick your opponent. You're number 2, you get to pick the next one down. Like, that's the way she goes. You want rivalries? Like, that's the thing that I hate about this is they go, we want rivalries. We want rivalries. What would better ensure a rivalry than a team picking their opponent, right? Like, look how big a story it was when Leaf fans, teenagers, cheered "We Want Florida" in Maple Leaf Square. How offensive that was to the Florida Panthers and to the establishment of hockey. It was like, oh, wow, you called them out and you lost. How great would that be is if you ever had a series where Boston picked Toronto, Like, imagine that. Imagine they go, we think we got these guys' numbers. We think they're soft. We dominate them every single playoffs. We beat them both. We swept them in the regular season. We want them. Give them to us. Boy, that'd be pretty juicy. That would add the stakes, right? I hate this playoff format. I know you're right. It's affected the Atlantic more, and so we're looking at it very much through our lens. But I don't think it's worked at all. And I know this show is how does it affect the Leafs? It is definitely, in my opinion, affected the Leafs in a negative standpoint, especially with the composition of the way that their team is built.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree entirely. What was wrong with 1 versus 8? And the thing with the rivalries too is we've had really good playoff rivalries between teams that aren't in the same division.
No duh.
Like, I think back to like Vancouver, Chicago. Like, there's tons of examples.
Yeah. Do you think that, like, we suffered not having Caps Pens was just because they were in the same division? Like, that was built on 1 versus 8. We still had Sid versus Ovi. You just wanted to see the best teams play each other. And eventually you kind of get that come postseason time. I hate it. And this kind of gets to something, I actually want to touch on with you today. And maybe we'll just pivot here before we get back into some Leaf stuff. The March meetings stuff annoyed me. And I don't know if you heard any of my segment yesterday with Bourne, but this is basically a retreat for the general managers, which is fine. Call it that. Say general managers retreat. I'm tired of this being like league meetings as though important business is being conducted here. Oh, no more guys putting their leg over the board on shifts. Okay. Ooh, what a foundational change. Okay, now we're going to review puck over the glass. Ooh la la. Wow, you guys are really cracking the atom down there in Florida. Ooh. Every year it's the same thing. Everything's fine. Oh, this year it's about letting Peros have it. Okay, what's the change? Well, nothing, but they're gonna let them have it, apparently. Whoa, shaking in my boots. What a lovely time to be a sports fan. There have been major issues with this league year over year, and they continue to just say, yeah, whatever, we're gonna leave them. I don't get it. Like, I don't know what we're supposed to do. I don't know what we're supposed to say, but playoff format, to me anyways, continues to be, this is what, year 6 of me going, this has got to be the major point of contention. And like you just said, they barely bring it up. They barely table it.
Yeah, I think that sometimes they struggle to see it from the fans' perspective, right? Like, and I think that, and the other thing too is I think a board of governors meeting, there would be some of the more serious business gets done, and there's more interesting things that come out of that. At the GM meeting in March, I mean, our guys that were going down there were like, I don't think there's going to be anything there. It's really, it's kind of like a schmooze. Yeah. I mean, they're networking, right? Like they're setting up, like, I'm sure the guys that are out of the playoffs, they're setting up what their off season is going to look like, and, maybe making a deal or looking at free agents or whatever. Like, so there's business happening there. It's just not the stuff that's going to come out in the headlines, the day that it ends. I know that there's some LTIR stuff coming that is kind of interesting. Like it sounds like there's going to be a push for something actually to happen with that, and maybe that's like the biggest thing that comes out of that.
If you were down there, or let's put it this way, if you were a GM and it couldn't be the schedule, is there anything else that you would table, that you would try to champion seriously?
Oh man. Well, I mean, I think 3-2-1 for the playoff or the points format. I think that's long overdue, and I think that would change the way that teams play down the stretch too. Because if all of a sudden, if you're a team that's on the outside, like let's say you're New Jersey, if you go on a run and you win a whole bunch of games in regulation and get 3 points, all of a sudden you can gain, and I think that would put teams higher up on notice too. Like in theory, the Leafs could string together a whole bunch of regulation games and maybe have a chance at catching Florida or Boston. Whereas the way the playoff or the point format is now, the way the standings work, it's impossible to catch anybody. So I would bring that in yesterday.
I much prefer that than adding an extra playoff team. Like I would rather they tinkered with that first before they tinkered with adding the wild card rounds and having that happen, like that makes more sense to me. And it at least could add some excitement. It is a different look. That actually is, I think that what we're driving at here is that the NHL clearly needs a shakeup to its regular season. Like there needs to be a shakeup to change the dog days a little bit, because it was one thing to do that in a less competitive media environment. But now, as other leagues are trying to get more creative, and as other leagues, I think, are doing a pretty good job of figuring out ways to get new fans, or at least being aggressive in trying new ways. Like, I don't think that the NBA's in-season tournament is in hindsight, you look at it and go, it's kind of corny now. Like the Lakers won, they suck. And the Pacers were there and they suck too. And it's just, but at least they tried something, and I kind of want to see that with the NHL. No more just, hey, nothing and everything's fine. A little bit of aggression, a little bit of acknowledgement that you got to fix the period in the schedule of post-trade deadline to playoffs, because I think it's a slog for everybody. Okay, so back to the Leafs. Here's my other thought off that game, though. So one is the dog days, and it's hard to criticize. But the other one is, so your cohort, Jonas Siegel, he pointed out that the Leafs, I think now they have 15 different goal scorers in 18 games. I think that's what it is, because he did it a couple of games ago and it was 14 and 16, and then Nick Robertson scored, and we've played 2 games since. So they're getting greater distribution of goal scoring on the roster right now, which is a good thing. But you're watching these lines every night, and they continue to remain jumbled, and we keep getting different looks. And yeah, part of it is that you have a Marner and Yarncroc injury, but same thing with the blue line is it doesn't really feel like there's anything that you can hang your hat on outside of Marner and Matthews eventually returning together. And I'm curious how big an issue you think that is going to be down the stretch, if we just have to accept that, if that's actually something that they should be trying to find out. Like, where are you at with that part of this team? Because to me, it's very strange the way that they're built right now, which is, I don't know where anybody's supposed to actually play at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Sheldon Keefe knows where anyone should be right now. I think he's searching for something, and he's looking, and what he wants to do is get down to that last 6, 7, 8 games and get dialed into what he thinks the playoff lineup is and keep them together at that point. So, part of the game's not meaning anything or mattering is that he can tinker all he wants. And he's a guy who likes to tinker and likes the line blender. And like, now's the time when you got a couple key players out. You're trying to see if you can get any chemistry with some of the depth guys playing with some of your different stars and seeing if there's anything there. And, they're getting looks at, like, what does Domi look like with Matthews, and what does Holmberg look like with Matthews? And, where do I like Dewar? Do I like him on the third line or the fourth line? And just moving some things around. And the other thing I would say too is that I can see scenarios where in the playoffs, they're going to have different line combinations for different games, whether it's home or on the road.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to have different line combinations situationally within games. So, just with the personnel that they've got some guys that when you need a goal, you're really going to want to lean on and put them out there. And then if you're trying to protect a lead, they're not going to get out there at all. So I think what Keefe's going to do is he's going to have purpose-built lines. And he's done this in the past a little bit, but I think for sure with this roster, he's going to have all kinds of different lineups. So I think you're going to see, in a playoff series, you're going to see 7-8 different lines that are going to get a lot of ice time. So I think probably get used to seeing the mix and match thing happening a lot.
I'll say two things on it from yesterday. One is that I have always believed that Domi on the wing with Marner and Matthews deserves a look. And I don't know if it'll ever get one, but I want to see more of Domi with Matthews. I've said it all season long. If you're going to have this guy, play him up there. Don't play him in the weird role. Get enough with this whole, you can't trust him defensively if he's playing with two other guys that are supposed to be elite defensively. Two is the only thing that kind of drives me nuts is you found something with Tavares McMahon. Like you did. You figured that out. That was, if you're doing all this exploratory stuff, that works for you. And maybe it's just McMahon kind of does work everywhere, which is good for him, but don't screw with that. Keep Tavares with two guys. Eventually, hopefully, it ends up being Yarncroc, but maybe he ends up getting bumped up the lineup just because they need they trust him more and they need him somewhere more. But ultimately, that's what I want to see is let Tavares have a line. Let him have McMahon. Let him maybe even have Nyes. I don't care. Give him the two choppy guys that go and dig pucks out and let him play with those two. You figured it out. You don't need to tinker with that anymore. Stop. We don't need to see Nick Robertson with John Tavares. It's not going to work.
Yeah, I think the important thing for me is that they keep that Tavares line and then they have a Nylander on a different line and they have Matthews on a different line.
That's what I mean.
I think that's what they got to do. Yeah. But I mean, if Tavares is on his own line and you want Domi up with Matthews and Marner, who's the center on Nylander's line?
Yeah, I know it's a tough one.
There's nobody. Mm-hmm. That's why I wanted them to go get like a Wenberg or something like that before the deadline because they needed another option. Like you can't play Dewar there. It's a big need, and their lineup and I know you don't want to give up a first round pick for him, but if they had Adam Henrique right now, their lineup looks pretty good. Like that's what they needed, like a guy who can play in the top three lines who can play center, and they just don't have one.
Okay, you know what we've also definitively figured out? You tweeted about it yesterday.
Yeah, Brody.
Well, the Brody Riley thing, stop doing it. Stop doing it. This is a dated reference, but this is stop trying to make fetch happen. Stop trying to make Brody Riley happen. It's done. Like there's 0% chance this can work in my opinion. And I don't know. I get it. You've got some difficult things on the blue line. You're missing somebody, but why? What possible explanation could Sheldon Keefe give for wanting to trot this back out here?
I think it's just it worked so well for 3 years. Like that was their top pair for 3 seasons, really. Other than when they had Muzzin and they tried Muzzin and Brody a little bit, it was Riley Brody. Like I bet that's their most used pairing over the last 3.5 years since they signed Brody to that deal. Mm-hmm. And it was a good pairing. He would consistently show up as one of the better pairings in the league. Over the previous 3 years. So I'm sure. It's like with coaches, they all have their comfort goats, and I think that the comfort goat for Keefe is that he's used to that working really well. He's used to being able to trust that line to generate that pairing to generate offense and to play against other teams' top lines. So when he looks at his lineup, he's like, okay. But I agree. I mean, this is the games that don't matter time. This is experiment time. Let's see what else you've got. Let's mix in some other looks. Maybe you want to try Riley with McCabe. Maybe you want to try Edmondson with McCabe. Just to try something else, And I thought, and I think we've beaten on him a little bit, and I know they've been down on him, but I thought Liljegren looked interesting last night. I don't know how you felt about his game, but he plays close to 22 minutes. He's on PP1. He's out there 6-on-5. I was like, okay, yeah, I can see. I think using Liljegren in kind of a more offensive role makes sense. Third pair offensive role, get him some more minutes that way. And I would just be trying some more things like that.
I think when Marner comes back, he's immediately off power play 1 for me, and you're back to Morgan Rielly. That this is actually more a sign of, look, this guy was struggling with confidence, and we're trying to still find out more of the things he can do. And like you said, try new things. To me, this is a try new thing, but ultimately shouldn't and likely will not have, it won't be lasting. What I will say is, and I've been bringing this up a lot lately, is because I've been uber critical of Liljegren's game for a very long time. He frustrates me like few others. And it's very much a roller coaster ride. And I thought Bourne summarized it well, going, yeah, we do this. We talk about how he gets elevated when he has a role that fits him with the Leafs. And then come playoff time, he becomes unplayable because the matchups are tougher and you see the flaws in the game. But his expected goals for 5-on-5 since March, he's number 2 on the team. Like he still is, even after yesterday. So I look at it and I'm like, he's playing well in this role. If you can continue to find that role for him, it's great. He's the ultimate to me. I shouldn't say ultimate because it still remains that way with the Stars. But in terms of pieces that could be here around the core, pieces that you're supposed to have, a guy that you should have continuity with, he's a big question mark that, to me, gets settled this year in the playoffs. Like, what happens with him this year in the postseason? If you have to bench him again, or if we're having those conversations, I think it's move on time. And if he performs admirably, I think you go, okay, you know what? Good for you for sticking with it. Good for you for finding and being patient with this young player and accepting him for who he is. And now he inks I would say not a long-term deal, but maybe a medium one.
I thought when they brought in Lyubushkin and Edmondson, I was like, okay, here we go.
Same.
Liljegren's going back to be the number 7. They're not going to take Benoit out. They're going to go with kind of like a bunch of butchers on the blue line and go real tough. And they didn't do that. And that's interesting. And again, it could be like an end of regular season thing where they're like, let's give Liljegren a real run here to see what he can do. And he's had some stretches this year where he's been terrible. Mm-hmm. But then he's also had stretches. And again, like I was arguing with Jonas last night, he didn't like his game last night. I just thought, you give him some more minutes in offensive situations, and he stands out because they've got so many guys on the blue line that can't move the puck, that can't do anything offensively. And I think they need him. They need him to at least be able to be a third pair guy who can help them in offensive situations. And when you need a goal late in the game, you don't want to be putting you want Rielly and Liljegren out there within the last minute and a half of the game if you're going with 2 defensemen. Yeah. He can make a pass, he can move it up the ice. It looks a lot better than Brody or Edmondson or Lyubushkin. I mean, you don't want any of those guys out there late in the game. So it's very, very interesting that they're going to give him a shot, after it not working so many times. And it's possible they get good Liljegren, but you're right. I mean, we've seen it so many times where they get down to when the games matter and he's up in the press box eating popcorn.
Mm-hmm. And this is part of it too, though, is when you talk about those guys and when we're evaluating Liljegren's game, what I do think at times makes it so difficult is that he's supposed to have a skill set that they've just not really had especially on the right side, right, for years and years. So it's, is he tall or is he just in a photo with a bunch of short guys? Is she pretty or are all her friends ugly? Like, it's kind of one of those.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
Oh, I don't think maybe. I don't know. I think definitely.
When he plays well, though, you can see it. Like, you
of
can
course.
see something. The problem is for him is confidence and focus. Yeah. Those are his problems. Like, focus has always been a thing for him, even with the Marlies. It's like this guy. It's just like space cadet. Yeah. Just like not dialed in. I don't know. It could just be, when you're at that level as an athlete, you just got to have a certain kind of brain that works a certain way. And it seems like he's got like a little bit of a different brain in general.
Yeah.
And he's got to find ways to overcome that.
One of the first things I got, like a inside scoop, was about him when he was with the Marlies. And that was it, was brain. They didn't trust the brain. Like early on.
It was really, really obvious when he first came over, and he was just really slow making this decision, like painfully slow. It's like, what is he doing? Mm-hmm. And I think he's gotten better at that. But you see when he's not feeling confident, then it's a different player.
Yeah, I think it was beyond that, though. It was more like they don't know if he has the hockey sense overall, and that's what ends up burying him, is that when things get tough, and he gets under, it's not just the confidence, it's that he doesn't have the processing power to make the plays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's been the number one criticism of him for a long time, and he's moving into his prime. I think he's 24, probably closing in on 25. He's going to be an RFA. He's going to have arbitration rights. That contract's going to potentially be tough to do, and it's going to be a big decision for the Leafs.
Yeah, no, it is. Okay, last one. What are they doing with the goalies? Are you digging in this yet? What's happening here? Because now it's getting into mystery mode here. Now I thought 100% Woll was going to get that game, and then he doesn't. Then he's not even playing. I don't understand what's going on here.
I think what they're trying to do is, I think Jones being the backup is just making sure that Woll doesn't have to play the day before he has to play tonight.
That makes sense.
I think that's all that it is. Because you're carrying three goalies, which is a really unusual situation. I think we're just not used to, when you're a team carrying three goalies, you might as well use the third guy on the back-to-back as the backup. Like, why not?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I still don't know why Samsonov got 4 in a row. And I've been the biggest, hey, Samsonov's not terrible guy going. I think I'm the only person in the market that's not rooting for him to fail actively because everyone's just cheering for their take that Woll is the guy. And my only position has always been, I don't know how we can be this definitive when he has less than 30 starts in his career and the other guy has been showing you some promise. But yeah, I also do think Woll is eventually going to be the guy and that the organization has good reason to sort of be backing him in this way. But the 4 straight starts. Can I give you a real conspiracy theory?
Sure.
Okay. Remember when what were we going to call the show? Conspiracy time? Yeah, I forget.
Conspiracy Corner, I think he said. Now it's time for Conspiracy Corner. I said that's the name of the show.
Yeah, the Conspiracy Corner with JD Bunkis. This is how I'll close today. When they put Samsonov out there again, I thought, I wonder if Keefe is running him out there so many games in a row because they know that some of this is fraudulent. And they just say, if he's splitting the games, he might be able to confuse everybody and make it, he's getting hot and he's playing a good game, right? But if we're running him out there over another long stretch here, he'll eventually expose himself and we can finally just put in our young guy and say, see, we gave him a shot. This wasn't, you can kind of sell it to the room. You can sell it to Samsonov. Hey, we gave you a chance, but ultimately the chance was they were trying to give him enough rope to hang himself.
Yeah, I don't know the reason. I wonder. I mean, there's a couple possibilities. Maybe
rank my conspiracy out of 10. 1 of 10. 10 is the best. That's a 10 out of 10 conspiracy. That it's you're getting the rope to fail.
I'm going to give that one a 3.
Oh, hurtful. I thought it was good. I thought it was.
They don't want him to fail. They want both the guys to be playing well.
Yeah,
so
that's why it's a crap.
Washington's probably the easier start, right? Like that team can't score. They don't have much of a power play. Samsonov's record against Philly has been unbelievable in his career.
No, it made sense to play him in that one. No, it made sense to play him in that one. He's also had the psychological issues versus Washington too, right? It's just He's playing Ovi. He's probably wants to let him score, so he gets the goal scoring record. He's probably going to get out of the way of a couple of pucks to try to help out his buddy get to the record. I don't know.
They probably want to give Samsonov Edmonton too, right? So they probably split it up this way.
I think if Woll plays well tonight, you give Woll Edmonton again.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my opinion. Again, if they're going to play the hot hand thing, I think Samsonov. Here's where I'm at with him in these last couple of games. I don't think that you can really blame him or fault him or say, "Ooh, he's been terrible." I still remain obsessed. I really don't. You know me. I text you about this. I'll be like, I really don't. I just immediately mute conversations on Twitter. I don't really see too much. But one guy got me the other day where he was like, "Samsonov, you can't trust him because he melts down." And it was at the end of the Carolina game, and I went, "How could anyone possibly blame him?" It's like that's what gets me is when people have the iconically bad takes where they're so embarrassing that I go, I have to this is crazy. This is lunacy. You got in my head with how a person could think this. But he also, I don't think has been good enough to say he's the hot hand after these last 2 games. Play the other guy.
You were messaging me say don't respond to the reply guys last week.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I'm normally not a reply to the reply. But what I'm saying is every once in a while, you'll never get me if it's, you being mad or you're being a jerk, I'll just mute you. I mute the conversations most of the time anyway, so that the only things I see are people I follow who interact with the tweet. But before the mute button, if you get in there with like an unbelievably strange opinion, it will haunt me. That's why I have to mute them.
I think Samsonov's actually been pretty good. Like if you take the balance of his work,
man, since he came back, and people go, "Oh, that's you're cherry picking." It's like, yeah, but it's like a cherry pick for a reason. Since he's been back, he's among starters who have 400 minutes played. I was looking up because you need to have a qualifier over that time of actual guys playing. He's like sixth in expected or goals above expected or goals saved above expected. He's like top 10 in every single category. He's just been a good goalie. He hasn't been overly spectacular, but the one I thought was interesting was like the expected goals saved. He's basically a fraction of a fraction is separating him between the number 2 ranked guy, and he's got more of a gap between him and Connor Hellebuck in that time. And again, it's just one stat. We have enough now where you can stat anybody to death or kind of cherry pick and choose, but you go across and it's like he's been very good. The team in front of him has actually been better. They haven't been giving up as many high dangers, and he hasn't been actually forced to, I think, be in those positions as much as we would think in our, from our biases when we look at it, our eye tests. But ultimately, there isn't a number that you can find that tells you that he hasn't been good enough to be a playoff goalie since he returned in January.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think part of him melting down early in the year was the team was a complete mess. Like remember when they're trotting Klingberg out there and they were just giving up so much. So
yeah, but Woll played really well.
He did, and so did Jones.
Yeah.
So on the whole, the Leafs goaltending, on the whole, what they've got this year, I've seen some people have defended the Leafs and said the record's bad because Samsonov melted down there for a month and a half, and it's like, well, no, because they've gotten pretty good. Well, they've gotten pretty good for goaltending performance overall because Woll's been good and Jones has been good and Samsonov has been good lately. So overall, the goaltending was something that was talked about a lot coming into this year. I think they have to be okay with what they've gotten from their guys.
No, I don't understand the argument for that being the record because he's got a great record. The save percentage still isn't there, but the record is good. So no, that has nothing to do with it. That's a quick dismissal. Like, you want to know what their record is with Samsonov?
It's great.
It's 18. It's 18-6. Like, I don't know what these people who's making the case of what they were 2 of those games, right? Like, what are we talking about here? That's wild. Don't tell me takes like that. They'll stick in my brain. I just told you that I can't have the lunatic takes because they sit with me and then I think about them and I'm like, how do I tell this person? How do I change them? I can't help it. Anyways, all right, James, thanks for making time as always, brother. I'll talk to you next week.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, JD.
See you, man. James Mirtle, Senior Managing Editor at The Athletic.